Let's see, how much of this video can I spend messing about with my phone? Lots. Hello world, I'm still IkiFoo for some reason, and I have a wee message for you today. Just because a game is bad doesn't mean it's all bad. I'll start this off with a simple confession. On some level, I love all the games, even the bad ones. They'll often have a feature which may not be redeeming by itself, but should still be held up and praised for what it is. However the game actually turned out, someone on the dev team cared. Now, this doesn't mean you should go straight down to your local charity or thrift store and just clear the shelves, not unless you want a big dirty armful of FIFA anyway, but there are undoubtedly bad games which still have neat ideas worth addressing. The most common one these days is to get your AAA console titles looking as gorgeous as possible, to the point where frame rate, gameplay, fun and damn near everything else falters. And I'm not saying it's easy to get that level of graphical fidelity. I mean, we're talking 200-person dev teams here. With all these next-gen consoles scrambling to get a foothold, it's the default way to get your game noticed. By going retro, we come up with some more interesting examples. The one I find comes up most often is music. You can have a game that you would never play if there was a better option available, but you could be convinced to have the soundtrack on whatever device you stick MP3s and a pair of headphones into. You need only go back as far as Alone in the Dark from 2008 for a well-received musical effort, or even further to the notorious cheap Deathfest Silver Surfer on the NES. I'm serious, get Level 1 theme on YouTube, that's some of the best 8-bit music I've ever heard. Or I could give an example from between those two. Hear that music in the background? The one that's been going since the start of the video? It's from the notoriously panned Rise of the Robots, a game that relied on its 3D pre-rendered sprites and pretty much nothing else. Alright, let's have some more examples, and by more examples I mean I'm going to bring back one I mentioned like a minute earlier but in a different context. I write this, you know. If we can jump back to Alone in the Dark for a second, some of the things they did with fire that can be spread or extinguished, they looked really good. And they did item crafting long before it became the hot new must-have in-game for no reason feature. There was also the fact that wounds were visible on your body, but that would also raise the issue of healing items that repair both your injuries and your clothes. Stepping back a few years, the PC and PlayStation 1 had Martian Gothic Unification, a fairly cheap and blatant Resident Evil in space game, but the concept of having three characters who have to stay apart at all times got my attention. It forced you to figure out who to send certain items to in order to progress, who needed them or who had the skill to use them. Now just because you're controlling one character doesn't mean the others are safe, and you could get called back to help one of them fend off an attack at any time. I always thought it might have worked better as a point and click game, but then I might have a touch of bias. I only found out years later that a point and click game is exactly how it was originally conceived. It was made by like 6 people and some contract workers. I have a wee soft spot for tiny dev teams. Also, it was written by Stephen Marley, who worked on Dreamweb, so there's at least a little bit of credibility there. Alright, enough of these newfangled polygons. The Orion Conspiracy and Fable, no, not that one, the other one, have big problems with their design and story, but they have full-screen interfaces with no dirty great verbalist getting in the way, and they use SVGA graphics to brilliant effect, looking crisp and detailed. Okay, not a great example, I just happen to have a bit of a hard-on for high-res pixel art. Plus, there's something funny about a game so low budget that voice actors end up blatantly talking to themselves. And while we're in pointy-click land, look, it's kind of my thing, okay? We can add Lure of the Temptress on too. Same company who brought you Beneath a Steel Sky and the Broken Sword series, by the way. The animation was above average for the time and type of game, but not quite as good as they would be in later games. The main thing they were touting here is the AI for NPCs. They had routines that they followed, and they could even hold conversations with one another. A far cry from other games where a bunch of sprites would wait around for you to give their pitiful lives meaning, and way more than we expected from AI back in 1992. Sadly, that's also what made the game rubbish, because they spent most of their time getting in your bloody way. Don't worry, that review's coming. Better 2D example would be industry whipping boy IkiFoo. Yeah, we're going here. Oh yes, dumb concept, cheap enemies, terrible flow for a fighting game, these things are all true. But as you'd expect from the people who brought you both Another World and the original Flashback, the animation is smooth and fluid. Way, way better than most 16-bit games. Now I know I say graphical fidelity is boring to talk about, but it's a far bigger achievement when you're dealing with limited cartridge space. Not to mention the fact that in those days, the number of games with animation that detailed could be counted on one hand. Don't get me wrong, the game is still bad enough that there's an entire website dedicated to taking it out of the public domain. And strangely enough, another website trying to save it. But I seriously don't know why people never mention this when talking about IkiFoo unless they're just picking a bad game and being very, very lazy about it. Now we'll jump forward for one more example. Fahrenheit, aka Indigo Prophecy. Most people would at least acknowledge how badly the plot goes inside out and up its own arse toward the end. But that first scene, where the character commits a murder against his will, where he has to decide how best to clear up the evidence and escape before a cop comes in and discovers the gruesome scene. In my opinion, the tension felt in that scene set a new benchmark. Of course it became too much for some people and they just run straight out and ruin the entire point of the scene. Andrew. So those are my several hundred examples, but how do they excuse bad games? Well, on the one hand they don't. Some of the games I've mentioned aren't worth playing at all. But someone might. Someone might remember these games. They might bring them up later in life, a blog, a video, hell, a book. And whenever they do that, they might remember that one good feature, the one that's worth telling people about. They might be games developers themselves and they decide that's going in because they played this bad game, because it somehow made it out of a developer's mind and into something that somebody played. So yeah, the idea might have ended up in a bad game, but it got somewhere. If you don't put it in a game, any game, then the potential for it to be in a good game is zero. Point is, this gives the idea a chance to endure. Somebody will see it, somebody might remember it, and they might just put it into something good. But if that game had never been made, then that idea could have potentially never been used. If we have to have bad games so that those ideas can get out, I say so be it. And of course, here's the obligatory question for your face. Are there any games you've played that weren't good, but they had one particular feature that you liked? Not necessarily a guilty pleasure, just an idea you wish had been in a good game. You know where the comment box is. I'll see you around.